we don't need to define, these things. We can't probably really, but we can know them nonetheless.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mind Matters. Harrison Cayley here with Adam Daniels and Luke Koch. Say hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, as usual, we've got a little bit of a delay with our international connection, but that's okay. Today, we are going to talk about a bunch of stuff. Luke recently has a couple articles on his Substack inspired by the recent question of questions that people are having a lot of trouble answering, maybe for good, maybe for bad reasons. What is a woman? There was that documentary by, was it Matt Walsh?
Yeah.
What is a woman? That came out recently. I didn't see it. Did you guys actually watch the documentary? Luke, did you?
Yeah, we watched it, and it's really great and quite terrifying.
I've just seen some clips from it, but I think was it inspired by the quote from the Supreme Court justice hearings and the one what was her name, Ketanji Jackson or something, and she was at one of the Republicans asked her if she could provide a definition for what a woman is, and she said, no, I'm not a biologist. Was that the inspiration for it? Do you know?
I think I could be wrong about this, but my sense is that it was the other way around. So that basically Matt Walsh, I'm not sure if he was the first, but he certainly kind of brought this discussion or this question into the public discussion, and then it kind of took off. So I might as well be the other way around.
Okay. Yeah. So it could have been one of those things like groomers, like OK Groomer, that was kind of a social media thing that then politicians, pick up on because it's part of the vernacular now. But what about your piece? Because you took not having seen Matt Walsh's documentary, I don't know if he comes, if the intention of his documentary is to come to a conclusion to actually be able to define a woman or just, give a basic definition. But you kind of take what I think is probably a unique perspective and refuse to provide a definition. Is that correct? What was your reaning behind that?
Yeah.
Why can't you define what a woman is, Luke?
Yeah,
do you not know? We've all heard of these these mythical creatures before. We suspect that they exist. As some of our YouTube commenters have pointed out, but, we seem to lack a diverse range of voices. Well, it's actually because we've never actually met a woman before. We're totally in the dark about these sorts of things. So yeah, what can you conclude, Luke, never having, been graced by the presence of one of these creatures?
Yeah, so I conclude that, try to define it and you'll fail. Or maybe that's just us nerds. I don't know. But, the thing is about the documentary, I really found it very, very interesting. So I don't have any beef whatsoever with it. And basically what Matt Walsh did was he used that question as a sort of trolling device, right? And also to highlight some of the absurdities of the gender ideology. So it's kind of like a very interesting move on his part. It just works. And but the documentary actually, is more about this whole gender ideology. What's going on with all the trans stuff and how they transition kids and that sort of thing. So the question is more like the entry point, kind of like the rhetorical device to get the discussion going and to kind of play with some of these contradictions. So it's clearly like a bit tongue in cheek, so to say. And so I don't have any trouble with that at all. But the thing is that I found interesting, and maybe you've seen a clip of that. he went like to, it's kind of brilliant move. He went to Africa to one of those, like tribes that are still there, that, it's not that they are isolated from anything, from everything, but they kind of live the traditional tribesman life. I forgot now which country it was in Africa. And so like hardcore traditional tribe, basically, who do it the old ways. And he asked them, about this question as well. And it was kind of funny because they were like, didn't even understand, what trans is and even what like a homosexual is, like just, what? They had no idea. And so it was kind of interesting because, they obviously like the lefties or the let's say like the gender ideologues, they also very pro diversity and anti-colonialism and things like that. So, and here's a tribe that has not been colonized, and and they are like the complete opposite of what of their ideology. So that was kind of cool. But anyway, what struck me as interesting when he asked them the question, what is a woman? They were like really dumbstruck. They looked at each other. It's like, what does this guy mean? And then they were discussing. Both the man and the women in the tribe were kind of like discussing, and they came up like with, oh yeah, I guess reproductive organs must be it, right? And then some other guy said, I don't know, like something about biology or whatever. But they were clearly like, didn't really know what to say, and were like just looking, searching for something. And Jordan Peterson was interviewed as well in the documentary, and he didn't give a straight answer either, right? And he said, yeah, if you read my article, you know that. He said, "Why don't you marry one and find out?" So I found that kind of smart as well. And then, I mean, I don't want to spoil the movie, but there's just nothing really to spoil. But the punchline at the end is like Matt Walsh asks his wife, what is a woman, and she says, it was obviously like prearranged, but she said, well, it's an adult female, and boom, and then the question was finally settled. So in the movie, in the dramaturgy of the movie, right? And it just struck me as very interesting that, I don't know, like what's, or let's put it that way, right? In a sane world, nobody would ever even ask that question, right? It would be just a complete absurdity. You just wouldn't do it. I mean, you could maybe talk about, what is a typical like woman like, or should be like, or like what is femaleness and maleness, but nobody would ever ask, how do you define a woman, in that kind of sense. It's just an odd question. We all know what a woman is, but even though we might not be able to define it, and I think part of the issue here is just that these gender ideologues, they kind of have forced us to come up with a straightforward, like scientific definition, just in self-defense, basically, and to say something like adult female, but nobody ever talks about adult females, except like a biologist, and even he would probably not talk like that about humans, right? It's just a word that nobody uses, and it struck me, when even after I wrote that article and I thought a bit more about it, and I think that what happened is that we are forced to use words that just don't make any sense in real life, right? I mean, just the word sex, in the sense of defining, or like in the male-female distinction, that it is something, that is on government forms, right? Or used to be before they came up with the word gender, that's all other kind of forms, but and it's something that the biologist, might talk about in a scientific article, like something like that. but it's not something that we use because it doesn't make any sense, because we know what a man, what a woman is, and even when we want to know if a cat is a male or female, we don't ask what's its gender or what's its sex, right? So we just ask, oh, is that a he or a she, something like that, or if there's any ambiguity with whether someone is a man or a woman, which rarely happens, but it can happen, right? So we also don't say something, oh, I was mistaken about his sex, or his gender. We just say something like, oh my God, I thought it's a woman, haha. So it struck me just that there is something with language and with words that have a very deep, rich meaning, especially words that we use every day, right? That are just part of the course of life, like man and woman, boy and girl, things like that. There's a very deep intuition about these things, and there's a whole world of experience, that we all share, and that is totally obvious, and there's all kinds of connection and things that in these words, and if we try to put them in a box and give them a definition, like adult female, or like has this and that chromosomes, or I don't know, like has a reproductive organ, I mean, that's kind of like doesn't really make sense, and doesn't even capture like what this is all about. Yeah, so maybe I stop there, but these were some of the thoughts that went on in my mind.
It reminds me of something that, first of all, that I read in The Matter with Things with Ian McGilchrist, by Ian McGilchrist, and then I was just listening to the interview that Jordan Peterson just put out with McGilchrist, and he talks about this idea about language. And so in the book, McGilchrist is talking about, I can't remember the exact example he gave, but he was talking about language in general and its inability to capture reality. I think it was a quote from another author where he was describing how, I'll just make up an example. It's similar, so you could say, oh, he went over and turned the light on. And so then in your mind, you can picture that happening, but the phrase itself, it's very definite, this person went and he did something. But between the words and the actual action, there's an infinite amount of data, of information, and like of color and difference that can't be captured in that language. So you can't get across precisely with language the exact path that every part of his body took to move towards the light. You can't picture exactly what the switch or whatever the implement is for turning on the light. You can't picture it, its color, its shape. And as much as you try to do that, so you could write an entire book about this one action, and still it would not capture the action itself in all of its detail. The only thing that can do that is experience. So you can actually watch him doing it, and you can see everything about it that cannot possibly be captured in language. Language is an extreme like shorthand to get across just the very basic, gestalt or whatever, the whole, but it can't capture all the details, and it can't even capture you'll have to create a whole in your mind based on the language. You'll have to extrapolate based on the language that's being used, but you can't capture the actual experience. The only way to capture the actual experience is to experience it. And so it's kind of like a Borges story, where with like the map and the territory. So there's this Eastern emperor that hires, these map makers to make a totally accurate representation of his kingdom. And so they make a small one. He's like, no, it's lacking too much detail. And they end up creating a map that is an exact replica of his kingdom. So he creates a double of the kingdom. The only way to create the accurate map was to actually duplicate the kingdom with everything in it. So life size, and essentially just create a new kingdom. That's the only way to get a completely accurate map. And so in the interview, Jordan Peterson's talking about attention, and he's talking about how during the interview, he's looking at a black box that he has on his desk. And when you just say black box, you get this, it's almost like a pixel of information. Black box, there it is. But when you direct your attention to it and look at it in more detail, then you begin to see that it's much more than a black box. There are shades of color depending on how the light is hitting it. There's the function it serves. There's all kinds of detail that isn't captured in just calling it a black box. You get a pretty good idea that it's a black box just from that description, but there's more to it. So there's a similar thing with like a woman. So you could go the biological route and come up with a definition. So like the ones you mentioned, like when you really search for one, like you know what it means. But when you search for a definition, you might say, okay, well, like the tribesmen, oh well, it has to do with genitals, with reproductive organs. But then if you have a person who's been in an accident or for some reason or another has lost their entire like genital region, does a woman who lacks now her uterus and her vagina and everything down there, does she cease to be a woman? Does a man who has lost his testes and his penis cease to become a man? Like if they're walking down the street, you'll still say, oh, he or she, or that's a man or that's a woman. So there's that gray case. And then you can go the super biological route where you go, subcellular and say, oh, well, it has to do with the chromosomes. So a woman is, XX chromosome, right? Yeah. And, or a man is XY. But then if you define it like that, that definition itself is completely meaningless because what does it actually mean? It doesn't capture anything about, just knowing what these chromosomes are. Well, what does that imply? It's a complete abstraction from reality. XX chromosome. Well, that if you tell that to anyone who doesn't know biology, it's completely meaningless. It doesn't capture anything about what a woman actually is, how she is experienced, how she experiences. It may be a feature that is necessary on some physical, biological level, but it's not a definition. It doesn't, you can't look at that definition and then come to conclusions about what a woman must be like in actual real life when you're interacting with one, when you find one in the wild, which I have yet to do, as mentioned. I'm still waiting to meet one of these
strange creatures.
But just by itself, XX doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't, and so when you wrote your article, the first one on this subject, Luke, I commented that right as I read that piece that you'd written, I'd just read, a chapter in Hervey Cleckley's book Caricature of Love, which we talked about with Josh Slocum. I don't have it noted where the quote was, but readers can find it on the Substack. But essentially, Cleckley's saying, it's kind of a dumb question because if you ask any 6-year-old, they'll be able to tell you what, they'll be able to point out a woman, from 100 yards away. And what else do you need? Like that's pretty much all you need. And to reduce, to try to come up to a definition to reduce a man or a woman to that definition, it won't capture what it's actually like to be a man or a woman or to perceive and interact with one. The definition will just be some kind of shorthand that will always have limitations, cases where it doesn't apply. Like I mentioned, like a woman who has lost her reproductive organs, or a man. And so there will always be these gray areas, but when it comes down to it, it's actually very simple. And no one, unless they have probably some kind of brain damage that is messing with their perception and their ability to link up the past experience with present experiences, then it's like Cleckley said, you can tell from in like 99.9% of cases from 100 yards away, and then you'll get those other cases where it's like, oh, I was, I guess we were wrong about that. That turns out that man wasn't a man or that woman wasn't a woman. And in that case, okay, well, but still you've after going through the rough, the kind of intuitive take on it that's accurate in the vast majority of cases, you get that tiny percentage of cases where it's not accurate. But then you still come to a conclusion. Okay. Oh, well, that's really a man. And that's one of those anomalous cases where, it's like a what are they called? those, oh, I'm having a blank, those visual,
like optical illusion.
Yeah, an optical illusion. It's like it's a genital illusion, where okay, oh, it turns out my perception was wrong in that case, but you can still kind of you figure it out after the fact, and then you kind of update your files and say, okay, well, so here's the whole range of man experiences and the whole range of woman experiences, and there's some that are really close or that overlap in certain ways, and I think it's those anomalous experiences that the gender ideologues then use to create their entire their entire schema, their entire philosophy and science of gender. So they take that tiny minority, that tiny percentage of anomalous cases, and then ascribe it to the entirety, and say, oh, therefore, you're wrong about everything because there's because there are those cases that you come across maybe once every year or two where you're not quite sure. Therefore, you can't be sure about anyone, and therefore the definitions are meaningless, and therefore you have no idea what a man or a woman is, and so we're going to have to tell you what the new rules are.
But then at the same time, too, it's like the only reason that those like questionable situations arise is more of like an exploitation of the limitations of like the language itself, and not really so much like a problem of being able to observe the reality in front of you, because.
What do you mean? Because if you go to.
Well, as an example, there's.
Okay.
There's an individual who will come to the place that I work who has very manly features, very pronounced Adam's apple, very strong jaw, man hands. However, they also have, breasts, long hair, walk around in like a nice dress. And so, if you saw them from far away, like the obvious image that they're projecting is that of a woman, but when you get closer, you're like, okay, this person seems to be like not someone who was born as a woman, but tried to change who they were. But that's not really
in their natural state. They would, in his or her natural state, without any social constructionism, you'd be able to tell.
Yeah.
But it's because of the choices and the actions that they've made in their life.
And then the ability to manipulate those choices or the definitions of those choices because of the exploitability of the language, that's where it really gets into the tricky weeds.
Okay, but aren't there also cases, or just one sec, Luke, aren't there also cases of someone who hasn't made any of those conscious choices, but that, just through their very biology, just is very ambiguous what they present as? Because I mean, it's very obvious in kids, right? Because sometimes you see a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old and it looks like a girl, and it turns out it's a boy, or vice versa, and you go, oh, sorry, parents, I thought your son was a boy or was a girl, or vice versa, or whatever. So, what do you think, Luke?
Yeah, but I think in real life, there's this. If it weren't for this crazy making by the gender ideologues, right? I mean, I think all of that just wouldn't be a problem. So, I mean, even if there's a very masculine woman, that you might say it's kind of ambiguous in that regard, that's not a problem. You would just say, she just doesn't look very much like a woman, but you still have this yardstick in mind, you know what a woman is, and you just say, oh, it's maybe a bit, it's not as close to, a woman than another woman maybe, but it's still a woman, but so it's like, this is really no problem, right? Or with the kids, that obviously you can sometimes not really know what they are. But I think the real danger, Adam, as you hinted at, is these whole language games that the ideologues are playing, and I think it's even worse than that. That they don't just take ambiguous cases, right, that always exist somehow and blow them up. I mean, they also do that, of course, but the thing is they operate in this abstract language verbal space, right? I mean, it's no wonder that they are also proficient at producing like verbal diarrhea in their theories and papers, like very complicated sentences and all kinds of weird special words and whatever. I mean, they live in that world of pure definitions, and they want to suck us into this world, right? And once they have us in that world, and that was also part of the point I was trying to make with that article, right? If we discuss, as you said, Harrison, if we go on about chromosomes and penises and whatever, it's like they're just it won't go anywhere. It's just not really like the thing to do here. And once we entered this space of definition games, then we kind of lose touch with our deep intuition about these things, and this provides an entry point for redefinition. And we're then so confused and we have lost so touch that we can be convinced that anything goes, or like whatever you make up is reality, and however you define it, this is the thing. And I think that's an important point, this kind of detachment from the depth of our experience. And I would even make the case, right, that I mean, we know what the woman is or what the man is not because we learned it from the dictionary, right? I mean, I just think in general, language doesn't work that way, really. I mean, dictionaries are kind of useless. It's like that's except for like very specific terms that are not used like in life, very much, that you kind of need to look up and that are very precise and you need to use sometimes, and for specific purposes. But other than that, I don't think it's really like language as a language works. And the thing is, behind a word like woman, that my sense is that there is like a whole universe of meaning. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? I mean, it's an experience that every human being shares. The experience of recognizing and feeling what a woman is, or what a man is, or whatever. So these things are so incredibly deep, and obviously they go back. I mean, they've always been there. So they're in a sense, they're in our biology, they're in our experience, they're probably like, I mean, it doesn't go any deeper, right? I mean, it's like just this super rich meaning with a million years old history that we kind of are connected to. So that's why I think it's dangerous to play these definition games, because that's how they succeeded to convince us of some weird stuff in the first place, right? By when John Money and these guys came up with the word gender, that then they redefined it and they confused us. Then people used sex and gender as a synonym, basically because they didn't want to talk about sex. That's my theory anyway. Right, so that it just became a synonymous, the words gender and sex, but the gender ideologues always had redefined the word gender as meaning something socially constructed, but the rest of us just use them as a synonym, and it's this state of confusion where they can sneak in like redefinitions and disconnect us from our intuition. So I think that's really an important point. I mean, we don't need to define these things. We can't probably really, but we can know them nonetheless. I think that's a point that McGilchrist also tries to hammer home.
That kind of touches a bit, at least part of what you were saying touches on like what you were saying before, Harrison, where language itself is always going to fall short of conveying the richness of actual experience. And then we can latch onto that idea and then maybe take it a step further to say that the people who then have very shallow views of language or very shallow understandings of language, or use it in ways which are shallow and perhaps manipulative, maybe we can then go so far as to say that they themselves have a lack of depth to their experience, which is why they seem okay with being able to just throw all these definitions of things around and jumble them in every which way, which to normal people doesn't make sense and doesn't work, because they just don't have that richness of the experience to give them that that information upon which to draw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to agree with that quickly. I think that's a very good point, because we always assume that people are all the same, right? And that everybody is on the same page. But in order to connect, I think language works by basically connecting experience, right? So as you said, Harrison, it's kind of like an extrapolation, perhaps, or maybe it's some even deeper than that. I don't know, but that seems how, we kind of like connect via shared experience, via language sort of thing. But if the experiences are different for different people, if some people just cannot, or maybe have lost touch so much with their intuition, if they ever had it, that they just cannot sense these connections, then you think you're talking about the same thing, but you cannot really understand each other. Yeah. So I think that you're right. You're onto something there.
Yeah, it might come down to an actual perceptual issue. That reminded me of something else that McGilchrist and Peterson were talking about. Peterson was talking about his clinical experience with anorexics. And because something McGilchrist had said or written kind of, triggered his memory about this, that through his work with them, he came to the conclusion that there was a very deep perceptual issue going on that, like,
it was them and OCD.
Yeah, because with the anorexic, he said that they're basically engaged in this left brain perception that focuses, that deconstructs the body and focuses on parts. So even though objectively, as a whole, anyone can see that the anorexic is grossly and unhealthily thin, that they cannot see their whole body. They will focus in on a part. So maybe like their ankle. And by giving exclusive focus to the ankle, they're looking for the fat on their ankle. And by isolating that body part from the whole rest of the body, they can see it as, too fat. Maybe, there's that little bump there, or it just looks big, but there's nothing to compare it to. They can't see it in relation to the whole. So the conclusion then is, by looking at all of these parts and concluding, without being able to compare with other body parts, by concluding that each one is fat, they then construct this, or come to this conclusion that their entire body is still overweight and fat, and that they have to lose even more weight. But they're not actually seeing their entire body. If they could, they'd be able to see that objectively they're way off base, that they're actually too thin. And so there seems to be something that's an extreme case where there might be something analogous going on with this whole gender thing, where the people that kind of get sucked into it have lost the ability to see certain holes, like certain holes, and so by focusing in on these little like atomistic phenomena, they can come to these conclusions. Like, I'm trying to think if there might be how that might work with. One way this might work is it's in the observation that the people, these kinds of people who, at one time will say that will decry gender stereotypes, for instance, but then when they actually come to embody certain certain things, they actually embody the stereotypes. So, for instance, there are these stereotypes about women, but then when they actually, when a trans person will actually, become a woman, they engage in stereotypical like women behaviors, almost in caricature. And so there's the one guy that I see. I have no idea who he is. I think he's part of the Biden administration or something, but he's the bald guy with the mustache that wears women's dresses. And it's like, at that point you get, it's like such a fractured, almost like cubist perception that like the definition has broken down so much that there is no definition. That's kind of the definition of queer. This idea of just breaking down all boundaries and just mashing everything together. And it's almost like people used to do that for shock value. Just, performers used to do it, guys like David Bowie or putting together two things that in practice, in ordinary experience, are usually totally separate. And by jamming them up together, it's strange, and so it's produced for shock value because people are like, oh wow, I've never seen anything like that. I don't know what to think or feel about that because it's so new and out of my range of ordinary experience. And so queer ideology seems to exist to kind of break down all those barriers, but then not for shock value. I think that's an aspect to it, but to normalize it, to totally break down any of those ordinary categories, like completely in the entire experience of humanity, not just as an example of an entertainer engaging in a little bit of shock value, but to be able to put these incongruous aspects together and then say like, oh, I am a woman. And then you say, oh, well, how? It doesn't compute. And I think the purpose of that is to the ultimate purpose is to inspire that kind of cognitive dissonance. Just to it's a complete mind frack. To use some Battlestar Galactica terminology, it's just designed to totally scramble your brains, scramble your mind, so that you totally lose any sense of reality. So then once you've been mind wiped, then the new reality can be inserted. And I think that that's probably the ultimate agenda, is just to with
queer theory being an offshoot of critical theory or critical race theory, and they're all connected in kind of like basic fundamental ways, where the idea is not to create a cohesive whole, but rather to deconstruct everything as it is currently in order to reshape it along the lines that they think it should be shaped in. If you want to kind of look at it in a bit of a conspiratorial way, I think that is kind of ultimately one of its purposes, as you say, is to deconstruct what we think of as normal human experience and normal personal relationships, to deconstruct all of those things in order to create something different, in order to get something else inserted in. If you take them at their word from James Lindsay's book, the idea is to create the revolution and create a communist utopia out of the ashes of the torn down world.
Yeah, they're all socialists.
Yeah, it probably has to do with with a different perception on the part of some of these people, right? I mean, they somehow maybe lack in a certain sense for whatever reason. I mean, it's probably looking at it in terms of psychopathologies might be like the best lens, but in any event, that they're lacking, some normal perception that, or intuition, if you will, that the rest of us has, and they kind of desperately try to make the world conform to their, strange way of looking at things, and they use, these kinds of language games. I think that's the chief means. I think Lobachevsky talked about that too, with the schizoids, and the big theories that kind of till the ground, so to say, for these pathological worldviews to come in, because it's kind of interesting how this process works with the warping of language. I mean, with the gender ideologues, that's probably the most obvious example. I mean, even though in other, like strange ideologies, this always played a role, but they directly like get at it, right? They want to change language, like, and you can see that. I mean, in English, you're lucky. I mean, you just have those damn pronouns, right, that remind people of the gender, or let's say like a male-female binary, right? But in other languages, it's like much more pernicious, and this stuff is everywhere, right? So you have like female and male forms for all kinds of like nouns and verbs and adverbs and so on. And they, in German, it's really crazy at the moment. They really try hard, to like, even the news station now, like the official state media, they now switched and use all those ridiculous words. It's just unbearable, and it's completely insane. And I think that's really what it comes down to, right? Kind of destroy people's natural connection to their intuition and to reality, and then sneak in this new stuff. And I was kind of shocked. I don't know if you guys watched The Sandman, the new show on Netflix, and I think it is, and it's just such a woke fest, and it just all like praises the most pathological kind of like, I mean, it's not all bad, the series, I think, but there were like a couple of things in there that it was just so obvious, that they normalize purely pathological types, basically, and even accelerated. And it's really, really strange. And the word gender, just to, because it's my pet peeve, I wrote something about that too. It's just incredible how they could sneak in that word, right? And the whole thing just makes sense. I mean, if you can even say that, because of that damn word. It's like without that, I mean, it just couldn't be done. So it's
without that framework, that gender framework that becomes separated, because you had written something somewhere, Luke, where you were talking about the difference between English and German, and the way that German refers to the sexes. It's basically just like, it's not male or female, it's just penis, or
it's just genital.
It's just genital.
What genital are you?
What genital have you? That you can't, like, since it makes sense that this kind of ideology didn't spring from German, because it's like rooted cohesively in the language itself. This hard connection to a physical reality. Whereas, like, as you were saying, once you create this separation, or this distance, this disconnect between the framework and the reality that it's supposed to map out, well, then you can, go off into crazy world where, kitten person identifies as a helicopter, and their kitten self and helicopter self are equally valid in their subjective experience to normal people who can, function in society without having to feel like they need to make everyone recognize and bend the knee to their subjective experience.
Yeah, it's true. The word gender, in German, like we talk about to gender. It's as a verb, and I mean we use the English. I mean I don't, but others do use the English word gender, and to gender, as like in German we say gendern. So as a verb, it means like to speak in gender conformist language. So they incorporated the English word gender and turned it into a German verb and noun and whatever, and because it just isn't there, natively. So the gender ideologues basically had to import the the English word, and I write in my article as well, because the gender ideologues, they came up with the concept of the social sex, and in German Geschlecht, it's the word for like sex organ basically, but it's also used as a male-female distinction, and they speak of this soziale Geschlecht, the social sex, and it's just and then they explain it that it's like, so that's basically your socially constructed gender identity. But social sex in German, it literally means like social penis or social vagina. It's just complete nonsense. It's
that
like
reminds me.
It's like saying your social sex organ. It's
That's I can't remember what the paper was about, but one of James Lindsay's fake papers that he wrote was on the conceptual penis.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so it's the conceptual penis.
So they actually took it seriously.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've been looking at recently, which I've been writing about on my Substack, is, I mentioned this book, so I was rereading Caricature of Love, but then I also read Shafarevich, The Socialist Phenomenon, which I've been writing about. And so one of the interesting things that came out, a kind of interesting overlap between the two. So I'm reading Socialist Phenomenon, and if anyone's read my Substack articles, he goes through all of the utopian writings that kind of developed in the history of socialism, even before the word socialism was used, but the template was there for the utopia. So way back from Plato up to Thomas More, and then a whole bunch of Frenchies, they all wrote these utopias. And then that tradition was kind of inherited by the socialists in the I think socialism as a word was first used in like the early 1800s or something like that. But the tradition goes back much further. But he identifies the common features in all of these utopias, and then after the utopias, after the novels, the utopian novels, came the actual socialist thinkers, like the philosophers, that were more of a presenting more of a system as opposed to a fictionalized portrayal of the perfect social system. And so the four features that they all share in common are abolition of property, abolition of the family, abolition of religion, and then a focus on equality and communality. And looking what the things that fall under the abolition of family are usually there's usually two dimensions in that, not always, but they often come together, or there's one of the two, and that is completely breaking down the parent-child relationship. And this usually shows up in the utopias as we want to completely, parents are the reason that kids are the way they are. They socialize them in bad ways. And so the way to do that is to break that relationship. Once children are born, we take them away from their parents, and they're going to be raised collectively. Maybe in kind of like what we might now think of like as an orphanage or a baby farm. And so the children will be raised by people who aren't their parents. And the other aspect of that, aside from the state having complete control over the education of the children, and in fact having the children having no relationship with their parents in an ideal form, is the issue of women and wives. And it seems that for some reason the socialists really didn't like marriage. What they wanted, they would often want the abolition of marriage, because for some reason marriage was oppressive in pretty much every way you could think of. But the solution to marriage was to actually just share wives. Women and men should just be, it was essentially free love. Everyone should just be able to choose whoever they want to have sex with. And so there's this weird sexual undercurrent in the entire history of socialism that is more explicit in some thinkers than others, but as an undercurrent, it's there in all of them, whether it's more or less extreme. And it's this weird thing. And even Marx too was talking about this issue about communality of wives, Marx and Engels. And so there's the way of looking at it as free love, like, everyone should just be able to do what they want to do with whoever they want to do it with. But in some of them, it's like, that's the basic idea, but it's more like, if a man wants to sleep with whatever woman he wants to, well, he should just be able to do it. And that's why I joked in one of my articles that it's like, was socialism the first incel, political project? It's because a lot of these guys, I'm wondering if they were, maybe like me, had just never encountered a woman before. No, but these guys just really wanted to. Maybe they were just so upset that they couldn't get laid that the only thing that they could think of was creating a social system where they'd be able to sleep with whoever they wanted, and finally women would have to sleep with them. Because this whole idea of communality of wives, and they were literally like speaking of women as property, which, I guess was in various places and periods of history was kind of normal to see women as property. Not exclusively so, but, that was kind of a thing. Women shouldn't be your own personal property, but it was the same argument with private property in the sense of like objects and wealth and things like that. It's like, there's something wrong about one person owning property or owning land. It should be shared by everyone. So there's something wrong about that woman being your woman, being that guy's woman. She should be everyone's woman. Like that's kind of the mentality that comes through in a lot of these guys. It's not that, maybe it was a bad marriage and maybe the woman should have a choice of who she wants to marry. Like that wasn't the motivation for what these guys were talking about. No, it was that woman shouldn't be that guy's woman. She should be everyone's woman. And all of them should just be everyone's woman. We should just be able to choose whatever woman we want. And that should just be the way things are, because things would be so much better. It would be so much more free. The women would be happier. The men would be happier. I'd be happier. I'm not speaking about me personally, but, everyone would be happier. That's kind of the idea that comes across there. And so then when you go forward, you get to some of the utopian socialists like Fourier, I don't know how to pronounce him. He's French. And you just get some weird ideas, like Shafarevich. He points out that Fourier was kind of the progenitor, like the guy that he was kind of an early Freud. A lot of his ideas were very Freudian, and you get some very weird, like pathological views about sex, and it just struck me as strange because I just read Caricature of Love, which is about the same thing. And the overlap between the two is like, it's like, there almost seems to be this identity between the two phenomena. What Cleckley was looking at, what he talks about and what he refers to as anti-sexuality. And then these ideas that show up in like the entire history of socialist thought of it's this almost, deep-rooted disgust or if not disgust, then just a total lack of comprehension of what most everyone else just seems to see as normal, which is, a man and a woman getting together, loving each other and having children, which for some reason to some people just strikes them as the epitome of oppression and like horror, which to most people is just comes as that's kind of like, that's a woman over there. It's just that's just what humans do, that's just what comes naturally. So I was just kind of struck by that that similarity, and then just wondering if the connections kind of run deeper than that, or if that's a kind of like a fundamental feature of both. Because a lot of the people that Cleckley talks about, like he's got a couple chapters, like one is called, let me just look at the table of contents here. He's got a chapter called, The Pied Pipers of Pathology, for instance, Art, Illness, and Propaganda. And so he's talking about the writers in the guys he covers tend to be from like the late 1800s to like the first half of the 1900s, because he wrote the book in 57. So that's the time period he tends to be looking at. But a lot of the people that he looks at, these might be novelists or philosophers or psychiatrists. It's kind of the three areas that he focuses on, those three types of writers. He doesn't look into political philosophy very much at all. But among the novelists, poets, psychiatrists, he identifies this current of propaganda, where it's not just a presentation or a representation of pathologic sexuality. There's an element of the desire and the push. Well, the desire to push these ideas onto other people, to make them think that this is the way things are. And in literature, the way Cleckley describes it, the way this comes across is the presentation of all relationships as like cynically impossible, and the impossibility of love, the impossibility of a healthy relationship between a man and a woman. And he points out that a lot of these authors that present this picture of relationships, in fact, were homosexuals writing about homosexuality, but disguising, their own personal experiences as being heterosexual. So they would write, like Proust, for instance, would write some characters as, a man and a woman, when he was actually writing from experience, or, people he knew about two men or two women. So he was putting the dynamics of a homosexual relationship into a heterosexual relationship. So, well, that's just one of the aspects, but there are others too, where, guys like, well, the extreme ones are like the Marquis de Sade, or like the Hymans. These guys basically were projecting their own personal sexual problems, like not only into their characters, but then presenting that as a norm, and not even just as a norm, but often with the intention of destroying the myth in their minds of the ideal relationship. It's almost like, you've been burned so many times that you just want to, take everyone down with you. It's like, well, I could never be happy. Nothing ever worked for me. I was always miserable in my relationships. So I'm just going to present this as the way it always is. And anyone else who thinks differently, well, you're just an idiot. You just haven't experienced what I've experienced. Yeah, you're bourgeois. And so there seems to be this similar dynamic, and the way that's playing out, it's interesting that the way that's playing out today is like the perfect combination of these streams. You have like, it's explicit. It's all about sexuality today. It's all about, transgender and queer ideology that this stuff didn't even exist when Cleckley was writing, but you can see kind of the precursors for it in all of this literature prior to Cleckley. You can see where this might go, and that's exactly the direction it has gone. And it comes out of the, coincidentally enough, it comes out of the socialist tradition. In this case, it comes out of Marcuse's critical theory, which was a neo-Marxism, which was, it was essentially socialism for the 60s. And now it's become, and that's directly what all of these ideologies have come out of. Like, it's their non-gendered mother and father figure, which is just kind of fascinating how it's all right out there now.
Yeah, those things that were so hidden and needed to be hidden, because I think, the society wouldn't have tolerated, say, like 60 years ago. No one would have put up with any of this from like the from the queer theorists. Like everyone would have, I think the majority of people would have looked at this and been like, y'all are some sick in the head crazies. And rightfully so. But so you needed, or there needed to be this kind of like slow degradation in order for it to really take root. I mean, it's Ponerology 101, where the society has to become sufficiently hystericized in order for the pathology to spread.
Yeah, like even the Bolsheviks did, there was a Bolshevist theoretician who, after the revolution was really pushing for communality of wives, but it just, it didn't fly. They had to give up on that one. But so I think it still probably wouldn't fly today, but the ground's been prepared way better than it was. I mean, today.
Yeah. I want to make a point about that, this wife sharing thing. I kind of think after like watching the Walsh's documentary and also watched an interview, I forgot her name. It's a bit older with on this trigonometry channel. Is that the name? With an old school feminist who came out
Camille Pally?
Against the trans stuff. Like even if no, not her. I forgot the name.
That's okay.
But she's really good. She's really on point, and it seems to me, and I could kind of understand where she was coming from, and I think part of this movement, right, and it seems, from what you said, Harrison, it really goes back even to the beginnings of socialist thinking. There is just something very misogynist about this whole thing. It is somehow like it comes in the guise of all this women's movement, blah blah blah, but it actually is like it seems almost like it has something to do with predatory men, that really are like like the root of it. And so, for example, with the trans thing, it's pretty obvious, right? Nobody ever talks about women transitioning, to male. It's all about like dudes, becoming a women supposedly, and then like preying on women. It's like, and it's just the whole theme. Obviously, there's also a war on masculinity going on and all of that, but still, there is something about this whole thing, that strikes me as like very anti-woman, and very like, I don't know, like maybe like incel type woman hatred, or like even like pathological like rapist types woman hating. There's something there. And another point I just wanted to make, because I'm a bit in enlightenment bashing mood again, and then some of that stuff, people always talk about socialism, Marxism, and all that, but it even goes down like to some of the Enlightenment thought. This line of reasoning, I think, and this idea that you can change man's nature basically, or people are malleable and all of that, and that if you think that we should turn everybody into rational, make everybody more rational, like some of the Enlightenment thinkers, were about, and then therefore create a better society, right? It's kind of like the same thrust. And once you're there, and then you can actually make all those sophist arguments, right? Wouldn't it be more rational to share wives? It would just work so much better and would save resources, and would improve the gene pool. And once you're there, you can make those silly arguments, and but then you lost touch, to just our intuition again, our normal understanding. And I think we talked about this before in the shows on James Lindsay, but it is just such a trope in socialist thinking, or Marxist thinking, let's say, or however you want to call it. This idea that like happy families, it's basically a myth, right? And behind every conservative household that puts up that happy facade, is like a total nightmare, where the man beats his wife and the children are traumatized, and it's like all just for show. And like, I mean, that's just a trope that is so deep in leftist thinking. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the conversations we had with Josh Slocum. I can't remember if it was the recent one we had or the first one, where we were talking about, I think it was the first one, about his experiences with his early childhood, and how the levels of abuse that he experienced. He thought that was normal. He didn't realize that there were families that weren't like that. So it's almost, that comes back to the idea that maybe a lot of this is projection, where it is, the experiences of a certain person, or a certain, type of person. Well, a certain group of people with the same types of experiences that kind of project their own cynicism and the reasons for their cynicism onto everyone else. And when it doesn't work that way, it doesn't apply that way. But it could also be, like with the communality of wives, it could be that that some of these guys actually had perfectly fine family lives. It's just like it's typical. It could be a typical like academic syndrome, where you have the stereotypical mad academic who gets so into his theories that he loses touch. In his theories, he's totally out of touch with his actual experience. So, on the weekdays when he's at the academy, at the university, he's a total misogynist and talking about the rationality of communality of wives. And then on the weekend, he's just having a good time with his wife and his family. Like, there could just be a total disconnect between the theories that he comes up with, when he lets his left brain go wild, and then his actual experience. I'd at least leave that open as a possibility for some of these guys, and for some of the people that might not originate the ideas, but that go along with them. It's like, because when you read it, it makes sense when you read it, because it's there on the page. That's that left hemisphere thing. It says it on the page, therefore it must be true. And then, when you stop reading, then you go and you have a good time with your girlfriend, and then you say, oh, well, I'm having such a good time with my girlfriend. But when I really think about it, it must, that it's probably just all an illusion, or you just don't think about it and you just go back to your theorizing.
Or you could think about it from her perspective. Then it's like, how would she actually feel about being shared around by hundreds of different guys at their whim and not hers? Like, would she really like that? You know what? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. But if the whole society were different, then that's just a product of socialization, that she thinks that. But if the next generation, once they've all been raised the same way, then the women will be raised to enjoy
Accept
that sort of
their
thing.
place.
Yes, like Brave New World. I mean, that's kind of like what Brave New World was like, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I wanted to say that I can almost forgive the Enlightenment folks for some of their theorizings, like for like the blank slate idea of being able to socially construct a totally different reality and those kinds of things, because there wasn't enough biological research or personality research to be able to be like, no, there's a very hard limit to what can and can't work.
There's common sense.
I said I was almost willing to. Is it almost?
I mean, there's common sense and thousands of years of human history, right? I mean, I think the guys knew more than that's also. I mean, I totally understand what you're saying, right? And in some respects, I think that's a valid thing to say, obviously. But that's also kind of like an Enlightenment trope. I think this idea, or it grew out of that sort of thinking, that we basically need science to tell us that like the sun is rising in the morning. If there wasn't a study proving that, then we just wouldn't know. And it's like yeah, so I guess for some things, we don't really need science, but even like, the blank slate thing is the one thing, but yeah, it's like this whole left brain utopianism, that we just by being smart can, change the world and create a way better life, and this whole idea of benevolence and welfare and all of that. So yeah, I think it's useful sometimes to go back even before like Marx and those guys and look at where these kinds of impulses come from and that in some sense they were there even before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that whole like you'll even see strands of that blank slate psychology in these like socialist novels, these utopias, because that was often the idea. I'd be interested. I haven't read like an intellectual like history of that idea to see if there are actual connections, or if it was just kind of they all just kind of thought the same things for different reasons. But it was that idea that everything, like all the ills of society, are caused by the structure of society and the way it's set up. So if we could only create the perfect society, like on an island somewhere, then we'd be able to totally fix human nature. Like humans wouldn't be so evil anymore because we'd be able to, kind of like the behaviorists, we'd be able to shape them and mold them from the time that they're born into good, upstanding citizens that are happy in their place, and there will be no problems. Everything will be great. So, like implicit in that idea is this blank slate idea of human nature, is that we can shape it and change it according to our whim to make everything better. And of course, that's it's not the way it works, but yeah, it's an interesting. Well, anything else on that? I wanted to share something, another interesting thing, but it's kind of off topic. No? Okay,
let's go off topic.
Well, so on my Substack, in reply to one of these articles that I wrote recently, someone in a comment had left a link to like a blog post that referenced this paper, or actually it was like a dissertation in German. So I couldn't read the dissertation, but the scholar is he's from the Netherlands. At least that's where he's based. I can't remember his first name, if it's Julian or it starts with a J, and last name Strube. And he's written on kind of history of socialism in the 18th century. So his focus, it seems to me, is socialism in the early, or the first half of the 1800s. So after the French Revolution. And he is, I believe his specialty is study of religions. So what he did is in his dissertation, he tracked the origin of these socialist ideas in the 1800s to various Catholic thinkers, for instance. But in the two papers that I read in English, one, he's talking about the religious ideas of the like early 19th century socialists, and the perception of them and their own self-perception as religious and as mystics, because a lot of those, like whether it was the Saint Simonists or the Fourierists, or there was one other group, like they were explicitly like religious in their own like self-presentation, and they traced back their genealogy through mystics like Jacob Boehme and like Saint Simon, and back to like the medieval heretics and all this stuff. And other people saw them, like their critics saw them as that too. So they'd call them like theosophists and mystics and all this stuff. So there's an interesting connection that, well, at least these groups in this period of time, like self-consciously perceived them as themselves as religion and as religious, and as wanting to create the perfect religion, like the universal religion that would unite science and religion, and then if again we find this tendency, if then only we could create this new universal religion, we could then spiritualize or fix or correct humanity. Then humanity would become perfect, and we just need to. So it was kind of this variation, but that's not even the one that I wanted to focus on. Just an interesting side note is that also the history of Western occultism seems to he argues that Western occultism actually grows out of this 1800s, this 19th century socialist tradition, and so he tracks it back to the one of the first Western occultists, Eliphas Levi, whose real name I can't remember what his real name was. It might have been. I can't remember. It starts with a C. But so he was actually a socialist figure in the mid 1800s, and changed it or created his pen name Eliphas Levi, and which was kind of the birth of Western occultism. And a lot of the ideas that this guy Strub's thesis is that a lot of the ideas that became kind of central tenets of Western occultism that Levi originated, they actually he was actually not very well read in the actual like Hermetic, esoteric, what we now call occult tradition, like Paracelsus and all those guys, the alchemists and that stuff. Like he wasn't very well read. Most of his ideas that became attached to Western occultism were actually just his socialist ideas that were common in the socialist circles of the time, that he then just applied, basically put new names on, and then became the tradition of Western occultism, or the root of the tradition, which then led to the later theosophists like Helena Blavatsky, and then the magical tradition like Aleister Crowley and stuff like that. Is that the roots of that come down to this stuff that was going on in the mid 1800s in France, that kind of had their roots in the socialist traditions of the time, but then became occultism. So I haven't finished reading his ideas on that. So, but it was just an interesting side note that I thought I'd brought out. So you look at the crazy stuff like in a lot of the magical community, like with sex magic and things like that. It's like, oh, now it all makes sense,
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's hard, when you look at these historical developments or the history of ideas, that the lens of psychopathology is, I think, so valuable in that regard, because you can see how like these impulses, they play out in different ways. Like if you want to have like degenerate sex parties, it could be magic. It could be like women liberation. It could be like wife sharing, whatever does the job, right? As long as you end up with your sex party, it's like, yeah. And it can be like confusing if you just look at or try to track the intellectual history, because I also often found that there's a lot of mix, between like really interesting thoughts that people expressed at certain times, and then it all gets jumbled, over the years. And as you say, then suddenly like the Western esoteric tradition, becomes socialized, so to say, or infected by socialism. And you could also say, even like good observations at certain points in time, and good ideas that maybe also try to change, society for the better, but were much more reasonable and intelligent, get then somehow mixed up with the pathological ideas of the era, or pathological drives, that associates certain idea with like certain things. And I just wanted to say that's why it can be useful to look at it from the other the other way around, so to say. What kind of thing does that produce? And to not get too derailed by this, just the intellectual side of things, and because it can be deceiving, or let's say, without that lens.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we've got to get going. Yeah. I think. Any final thoughts, Luke? Or are we good?
We don't need to define women to know what women are. Other than that.
All right. Well, I'll include links.
Call it a night for.
All right. I'll include links to the 2 articles that we had in mind that Luke wrote in the show description, so you can check them out on his Substack. And with that, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.